Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and yesterday in the comments I had someone say, hey, what do you think about, there's this guy who's been out here saying for years, this guy, it's kind of funny, I'll get into the backstory there. There's this guy who's been saying that 36 eggs a day, or 3 dozen eggs a day, will build more muscle, it's more effective than a cycle of steroids. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Alright guys. The guy in question he's talking about is Vince Gironda, and he was saying that back in, I believe, the 60s and 70s. Totally different era, and you guys need to remember Vince Gironda was a very controversial figure in his time. He's still got a bit of a following online, but you guys need to understand that the whole lifting world and even bodybuilding world, and keep in mind he was from the bodybuilding world. In fact, Vince Gironda was the opposite of the lifting world. He was the ultimate bro of his era. Now, he still got results in his guys. They had a certain look, but he was big on basically ketogenic diets. And I mean, it was like you live on steak, eggs, water. Steak, eggs, water. It was against compound movements. He didn't allow big, heavy barbell movements at all in his gym other than like the guillotine press and like dips. That was about it. But he insisted on doing those all ultra wide and, in ways that damage your rotator cuffs. He was all about large volumes with isolation work, right? And zero carb diets, not low carb diets, but zero carb diets and all this stuff. The original carnivore diet. He pushed all this stuff. Yeah, but he had this belief in things about food and eggs and everything else. Now, the truth is, from a nutritional perspective, are eggs very anabolic? Yeah, they actually really are. When you start talking about quality of protein for muscle building and all that stuff, eggs are absolutely a superior protein source. The yolks have a lot of calories. I mean, we know that eggs, and there's been studies on this, showing that equal volumes, obviously, whole eggs build more muscle than egg whites. That's what's been shown, but people are forgetting that's because there's more calories, and calories are anabolic. But yeah, they're a high nutrition food, but this whole idea of saying that it will do more than anabolics. And the only reason I covered this, he had asked that, and I went and looked through, and there's been a lot of articles and other videos. Other people have discussed this specific thing. But what people need to remember, you go back to Vince Gironda's era, they didn't have the plethora of stuff available that people have today, and they didn't use the amounts that people have today. So by comparison, his observation was probably compared to what first-timers were sometimes doing, under-eating noobs were first-time doing, compared to doing that. In his day, you guys got to remember, 5 or 10 or up to 15 milligrams of Dianabol a day, that was an anabolic cycle, right? That was an anabolic cycle. If you were to go to any forum today and suggest that for a newbie, which is actually in that era, that was considered advanced. That was the serious guys. They did up to 15 milligrams of that a day. That would be laughed at, and people today would try to pretend and say you wouldn't make any gains on that. You would make any gains on it. That's nothing. Okay, so perspective here. Perspective. Modern world, that would be so conservative that people would say it's a waste of time. But, the guys still got jacked back then on it, but they also trained really hard, and that actually will have some effects. But, what people need to remember, he also comes from an era where bulking was difficult. It was hard to gain weight. Why? Because they didn't have all the stuff that we have today. Their food was less processed. They had more whole foods and everything else, and people were all eating just whole foods. People who were into lifting were eating whole foods, and when they wanted to bulk up, they just added a lot of fat to their diet, whole milk, eggs, other things to get calories in, because they didn't have all the sugar and excessive amount of refined foods just weren't readily available that we have today, and generally even people who worked out ate healthier. So yeah, a lot of guys did struggle to gain weight. So by comparison, back then, sure, it was a different story. Guys were struggling to bulk up, and if you were struggling to eat enough calories to bulk up and you went and took something like that, you wouldn't gain very much muscle. And in fact, a guy who did that versus under eating versus a guy who just knocked down 36 whole eggs a day, which again I think is excessive. I wouldn't even do that with a bulk of me personally. I gain body fat too easy, have too big of an appetite. That wouldn't be something I would even do personally. But yeah, by comparison, sure, you probably would gain more muscle. But when you fast forward to today's world, we have a lot more calorically dense food available. A lot more calorically dense food. And by that same token, that was just a prescription of just random, just eat this instead of saying, hey, I just need to be in a caloric surplus, right? We're in a different world. We know more about nutrition and stuff now. And so to go back to nutrition advice from really outrageous guys like Vince Gironda, because he did make a lot of kind of outrageous claims. He was, even though he's revered, he was the bro, and he was kind of the circus act of his era. Even though the lifting and bodybuilding alike were still kind of very much fringe things compared to what they are today. But you need to also remember substances are different. Now we have guys who don't eat much food who get incredibly jacked. And people say, well, how is that? Because the substances that people are taking is not the same. People have access to Trenbolone. Trenbolone is now considered your ultimate physique substance. Yes, it has very negative health benefits. I don't recommend people jump up and take it. Even people who are gear users and choose to go down that route. That's one of those I say be very cautious with. And yes, I know it is the single most popular abused substance by people who get into physique, because it does have pronounced effects on your physique. And part of that is because when you look at what it does in animal studies, that's the reason it's used in feedlot heifers and stuff. It has been for a long time. It's used to grow beef because it improves and enhances feed efficiency. In other words, you don't have to eat as much protein. You don't have to eat as much calories to get that anabolic response. And in fact, they find that cattle on it tend to gain both body weight and muscle without a caloric surplus. All right, you see the difference here. The older stuff that people were taking, old school, didn't necessarily improve feed efficiency. It just enhanced what you could do with the protein and everything you were eating. It worked ideally combined with a caloric surplus for gaining muscle. Things like that they have today, fast forward to the modern world, people gain muscle in a caloric deficit, right? As long as they get in enough protein, there are people out there who gain muscle on some of the stuff that's out today while under eating still. In other words, there are guys out there, who are really jacked, who only eat 2,500 calories. For me, I drop 3 pounds a week on that. But that's what they're eating, and then they're ripped, they're jacked. And what do you think that's about? That's what's causing it. That's what's allowing that. You try to undereat the way a lot of these guys do and gain any substantial muscle, you're not. You're just going to lose body fat. But people are taking things today that improve feed efficiency. So while his statement might have been true in an era where the amount of processed food and stuff wasn't available and people were taking much weaker and smaller amounts of substances by an enormous margin, it's not even comparable. When you start seeing guys taking today compared to what they took back then, even guys who you think of as not very big, is an astronomical difference. We're not just talking about they're taking 3 or 4 times as much. We're talking 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 times as much stuff today. And that's becoming normal. That's normal now. So, different era. In his era, there might have been some truth to that. But to say that today, to make such a blanket statement, it's absurd, it's ludicrous. And it's kind of funny that people are still writing articles and making videos kind of discussing the fact that, oh, this might be true. It's like, guys, different era. And Vince Gironda was guilty of saying some really absurd things. It was part of his shtick. And at the end of the day, yes, eggs are very anabolic muscle building food, but no, eating 36 eggs a day is not going to put more muscle on a person than anabolics will at the sort of doses people even start with today. Right? It's not comparable. Not saying food's not anabolic, it is, but at this point in the game, that comparison would be ludicrous. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.